Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Publishers Without Borders session on publishing in the Caribbean with Latoya West-Blackwood. I'm delighted to welcome you today, Latoya. Latoya's been in the publishing sector for over a decade now and is the chairperson of the Book Industry Association in Jamaica, the festival director of the Kingston Book Festival, two jobs that I very much aspire to have. Founder of the I Publish publishing consultancy and a board member of Publish Her, the network established by Badur Al-Qasimi. That's quite an impressive CV, Latoya.
Thank you very much, Emma. It's my pleasure to be here with all of you. The Publishers Without Borders group has been like one of the best things to happen, over the pandemic in terms of keeping in touch with colleagues, and of course, Prashant for his constant source of humor. Yes. And of course, Simon, it's a pleasure to connect with you virtually for the first time too.
I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. But Latoya, we want to hear all about you and we want to hear about publishing in the Caribbean. And I wondered if you could kick off by telling us about your story and your journey into the publishing industry.
All right. So I will try to make it very short, but get to some important details. So I can remember falling in love with books at about 5 years old. I actually have a picture that I use in a lot of presentations about the time when I really just remember the magic of just getting lost in stories. And I didn't know at that time, and until much later, that I could convert this love into a career, and to use it to inspire others and to particularly work with young people and children. That's my passion as I've come to discover it. The journey to publishing actually started by accident. I was, looking at studying in political science, and I was pulled in by a mentor to help to organize a conference that Caribbean publisher Ian Randall, who is a pioneer in Caribbean publishing, was helping to organize. And so I just met him, as a part of the conference planning committee. We had some conversations, as we tend to do at, the in-person events that I think some of us miss. And we had a connection about books and, the importance of stories. And it was my first time actually meeting somebody right here in the Caribbean who looked like me, who was telling stories from this perspective, started out in academic publishing, but went broader. And I was totally like pulled in. And so we followed up with, him saying, okay, let's visit my publishing house, just have a look around and see how we operate. And that essentially was an interview that I, didn't know about. And I just started like on the spot, right? Organizing a WIPO workshop for the region on copyright. And so that's how my career started, from political science to publishing. So I think
you've definitely got one of the best jobs in the world, running the Kingston Book Festival and the Publishing Association.
Yes, so I'm just happy that that moment of connection that turned out into mentorship has put me on this path, where I'm able to help to tell our stories and to inspire a new generation, who will hopefully go on to tell their own stories in a way that includes everyone and looks at topics that we love as well as topics that we're probably not so comfortable with. I did a little bit of investigative work and looked up some of the work that Simon has been doing, and I think we are kindred spirits in that way. Just looking at literature from a very broader, perspective. Not just the stories that make us laugh, but the topics that we need to discuss touch.
I think that leads us quite nicely into asking about publishing in the Caribbean, and whether you could give us an overview of what type of publishing there is in the region, and where is it concentrated. It's obviously quite a big, diverse region in itself. So tell us a little bit about publishing in the Caribbean.
It is. So, I mean, I will start out with a disclaimer that I am a Jamaican woman living and working in the Caribbean. What I would love to see as regional integration, we're not quite there yet. So I don't pretend to ever speak on behalf of everybody, but I locate myself in the region and I'm an advocate for all things Caribbean. It's actually a very good morning for us where literature is concerned. And I don't know if, Emma has some superpowers we're not aware of, because today is very significant in that it's the last day of Caribbean, Read Caribbean Month, which is an initiative started by a bookstore grandma called Books of Sins, CINZ, I believe. You can follow her. And that. There's also the fact that I just came off the Commonwealth Prize announcement, where we had a regional winner for the Caribbean, who is Roland Watson Grant, who is a Jamaican writer. And of course, thanks to the IPA through Boudoir and the Bologna Children's Festival, they had an amazing blog series this year that looked at featuring voices that we don't usually hear from. And fortunately for the Caribbean, we had an opportunity to have our own Blue Banyan books featured. Blue Banyan is doing a lot of work in the area of young adult literature and children's literature, telling far more diverse and inclusive stories than we have ever seen. And they have actually worked with the BERT Awards from Canada to develop a lot more young adult writers in the region. So it's just a fantastic feeling. It's a good time, I believe, for us. In terms of painting a picture of the region, I would say starting in Jamaica, and I think the reality is the same in a lot of places, relatively small domestic markets, but big international impact in terms of the writers we produce and their works. Jamaica, for example, is home to quite a few award-winning writers, to include people like Kai Miller, our national poet laureate, who is Olive Senior, and we have Nicole Dennis Ben, who has done very well as well. We have Marlon James and quite a few others, spanning both, authors and poets, across the world, operating across the world. And so, in spite of our small domestic markets, we're having big international impact. One of the realities that we grapple with, though, is that our markets are traditionally textbook oriented. So the irony of producing these amazing fiction writers, but at home struggling with a national reading culture that almost doesn't exist. And so that's why, we have things
We've lost you.
like, so, okay, am I back? Hello?
Yeah, you freeze up a bit, but you're back.
Yes. And so, okay. And so, it's that's why we have important initiatives like Kingston Book Festival that seek to engage the public, particularly young people. So we target students and communities on the whole matter of just reading for pleasure. You don't have to be reading to pass an exam or, getting any big moral lesson. You can just read to laugh, read to dream. All the magic that we know comes with reading, along with the practical benefits like, just having an expanded mind that you can apply in various ways. Outside of Jamaica and looking, yes, go ahead, Simon.
I was just going to ask Latoya. Hi everybody. By the way, good to see you. Thank you for having us and sharing with us all of this, Latoya. I was just curious. I mean, this you're mentioning something that is so true to many parts of this world where literature is related to textbooks and school, and you're talking about creating events that give the word pleasure meaning in literature. And I was just going to ask, how have you found that your festival, your book festival, has impacted that? I mean, I assume that you've had an increase in presence of people, and so I was just hoping you could give us a sense of how that has positively influenced Jamaican readers and Caribbean readers.
So Kingston, yes, so Kingston Book Festival is what I'd like to call the little festival that could, like we started out, our founder, Kelly Magnus, who was a former publishing director of the Book Industry Association of Jamaica and a children's author herself. We just started because we knew that there was this need. The first staging of the festival was actually in 2011, so we're pretty young. And since then, we should have had our sixth staging in 2020, but due to the pandemic and not opting to just run to an online model, just because we wanted to take the time to really understand what we're facing and how we could create a new model, more than likely hybrid, that will serve us, going into the future. And so talking about impact, it has been hugely impactful. I think the last festival in particular in 2018, I think in all the years of hosting the festival, we kind of got to a level of maturity in terms of understanding the importance of inclusive programming. So we worked with the British Council Caribbean, for example, to bring Jamaican British deaf poet Raymond Antrobus to Jamaica to engage with our deaf community. And this was a very emotional experience for all of us, because imagine programming a festival, all along. It's not that we didn't know that deaf people existed or people with disabilities who would like to participate, but just seeing the impact on the young people who he worked with, who saw somebody who they shared this connection with, who had just gone about life not making that be, an obstacle, and producing such beautiful work. And the whole, merger of British Sign Language with Jamaican Sign Language, and having a deaf poetry slam at our final day, the book fair, which was amazing, right? And everybody was so excited. So, apart from that, we had Marley Dias also join us, and Nicole Dennis Ben. Nicole, as you know, is an openly lesbian woman who is a writer and a Jamaican. And to have her come home and to be embraced for her talent on such a platform was amazing. And it just shows a level of maturity that I'd like us to continue on that path.
It sounds like there's a huge amount going on and a huge amount to celebrate.
Also, in a way, yes, I think I got cut out there, but finally, for Marley, she was able to reach out to school-age children and just inspire them in terms of talking about activism. She's a literary activist who also does social justice work. And so, her charge to young people was that, look, for me, I am an American, and I saw where the stories I was reading at school weren't reflecting my reality, and I decided to do something about it. What are the issues in your community or your country that, you can start to address as young people? You don't have to wait to reach a particular age before you start to do something, and just the whole way that reading changed her life. So we've impacted thousands of children and communities, and we just want to continue along that path, and particularly continuing to program inclusively.
And do you think you've seen a lot of change in the last 10 years since you started in the publishing industry? Have you seen more publishers starting out, the quality of books being produced improving, and the reading culture change in your experience?
Wow. I'll try to, keep the answer short. I don't want to talk forever, but wow, this one is big because there have been, I started out by telling you about all the positive developments that kind of manifested this morning. And those are, we have the good news is that we have more talented writers coming forward, getting our platform. Um, but at the same time, when we look at surveys outside of, let's say, the Caribbean exactly, and to some of the spaces that we look to collaborate and give authors and writers space, we see where the Penguin, I think a report commissioned by Penguin talking about, how literature has to look at diverse voices because a very low percentage of writers who are not white are ending up, both in the classroom and on the shelf, in so we have to be a lot more deliberate about inclusive literature in a real way. Then in terms of national reading culture, as I said, we continue to work on in the ways that we can, both locally and through partnerships with international colleagues and organizations to boost the national reading culture. But there has been undeniably an underinvestment in places like libraries that support a national reading culture. Like the state of community libraries is something that we urgently need to address. Coming out of the pandemic in particular, right now, there are 120,000 children that we know are not being reached at all by any kind of remote learning or literary engagement. And for, the size of our population is just under 3 million. And that's just what they have managed to record. And that's a lot of children who are going to become adults. We're very concerned about that. And so we're actively seeking partnerships to, as I said, focus on things like libraries, through our book festival, look at ways of programming activities that can engage children, not just for learning, but mental health,
Yeah.
Latoya, I want to
helping them to get back on track. Yes.
Sorry, sir. Go on. Finish your sentence.
Yes, Simon.
Yeah, I just want to go on. I want to push it forward.
No, it's fine.
That's okay. Just I want to know if you had, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're talking about extremely important issues of getting, reading into the hands of children and getting, 120,000 children in a population of 3 million. That's a lot of children that need to be taken care of and supported. And you're talking about the challenges. And here's my question to you. I'm throwing it out there. If you had, and I'm not sure if I'm asking the question in terms of Jamaica, more specifically in your government, or globally the Caribbeans, but either way, you pick. But if you had to give a score from 1 to 10 to your government in terms of their understanding of the importance of reading, what score would they be getting?
Wow. To be honest, I would say I would give an E for effort. And why do I say this? I'm not saying
It's a start.
I'm not it's a start. I'm saying that, For Jamaica is a relatively young country. We're coming out of the whole experience of colonialism, which didn't end with our independence in 1962. And so on the verge of becoming 60, you know, the government is faced with the challenge of trying to look at development as a country and what they imagine are the indicators. So usually, it's around infrastructure and stuff like that. But recently, our prime minister made a very important statement, which I'm hoping to see some of the actions manifest, in that he did point out that, look, education and particularly getting our citizens reading and literate and engaged in that way is a part of our development strategy. And so what I would like to see is a connect between those statements and the actions that we take, because, critical thinking, empathy, just the ability to understand different viewpoints leadership doesn't fall from the sky. These are the things that having a national reading culture,
Yeah.
if you check across the Caribbean. So, for example, this week I met the founder of Books and Bush Tea, which is a bookstore effort in the Virgin Islands, and they literally have no bookshop there right now. The only book festival is something hosted by the university. And so this young woman is now on the mission to literally start back a bookstore. Before that, there was a bookstore that opened from 10:30 a.m. to, I think, noon, weekdays only, in an island. So it goes from one extreme to the other. So no Caribbean island is exactly the same. We also have the matter of language, which I'm very interested in doing more collaborations across translation.
Yeah.
So we have the Dutch Caribbean, we have Spanish and French. We all have shared historical and cultural experiences, but we are separated by language. And I don't think we should just continue along that path happily, because it keeps us disconnected. And, together we're more powerful.
Well, I think Europe is a good example. I mean, the European Publishers Association has created an award, and I mean, we've had them on our show on a few occasions, and I think you've got a great opportunity to create a micro, international United Nations of the West Indies and the Caribbean. So that'd be really nice.
That would be really exciting.
And then we could do
well, we had what about
right. We could do some island hopping and do all
we had
book sessions.
yes, we had an organization. Well, I say had because it's not a permanently set up secretariat, but we had what was called the Caribbean Public along that line. But then we have the challenge of sustainability, right? That's another major challenge. The region, as I said, is faced with a unique set of challenges that it's not that it's impossible to overcome, but it's going to take more than goodwill. It will take a lot of partnerships and investment, because, as I said, the region is grappling with under the historical past in terms of colonialism and the structures and systems left behind that keep us, economically underperformed. And so we have to be figuring our way through that. through these things. So, for example, in a time like now with COVID, one of our concerns as an industry is just what it will look like post COVID, if there's such a thing. Where, you know, who will be able to weather the storm in terms of the financial aspects of it, the business innovation. And that's why we're happy to be connected with people like you and with the IPA. Very excited to know that they're looking to launch like the IPA Academy, which would be looking at, you know, providing certain skills, etc. But arts councils who can kind of help, you know, members of the creative industries to weather the storms. There's no stimulus package, you know, like it's just, it is what it is. So we're trying our best, as I said, through the different partnerships and collaborations to make people and companies, you know, come out of this period stronger and more united.
You mentioned bookshops earlier, Latoya. I mean, how easily available are books to come by, and how are people reading? Are they reading physical books more than ebooks? Have audio books entered the market yet? What are the reading habits that you know about, either in Jamaica or more broadly?
So let's start with the access to books, access to literature. It is extremely difficult at the moment, if I'm to be very honest. And I start with the experience of, as a publisher, myself, not necessarily, I focus less on that side now and more on the consulting and, you know, international engagement. But I have had that experience of trying to coordinate even events for Jamaican authors who are now living outside of Jamaica and dealing with international publishers. And it's like a triathlon or something, you know, just the endurance and strength that you have to navigate this process. You know, it's exceptionally difficult, and it goes against our efforts to build up our reading culture, because the reality is that we don't produce all the literature that we consume here. You know, our printers, for example, are not competitive because of things like energy costs and all the other things. So we do import a lot of literature, and we are interested in hearing from other voices around the world. But there has to be a better way. I think there needs to be like this mass meeting of publishers and distributors, you know, to look at places like the Caribbean and kind of figure out a way that we can really make distribution much easier. And there are many of us who are willing to participate in that conversation. The reading culture, actually speaking to some book clubs like Rebel Women Lit, who was featured in Oprah magazine for their work. A very vibrant book club looking particularly at featuring literature by Black women from all over the world, but with a focus on the Caribbean. They have reported that they have done very well over this period. They are seeing where they have a digital strategy. So people order books from them online, and they're shipped to them locally or wherever they are. And they have reported that they have had increase in demand for books. People are reading more. In terms of audio books versus printed books, personally, I never like to use the verses for anything in literature. I think there's space for everything. I like audiobooks in some cases because if I read a book, here's how I work. If I read a book and I really like it, sometimes I want to hear what the character's voice would be like, you know, how they would say something like, maybe I want to experience it that way on a drive to the country or doing something, cooking, you know, and listening to a book. So I think they're all complementary. And what we can do with the different platforms is to provide access to different people. The reality of the world that we live in is that, people are consuming content in different ways. And I think that if audiobooks, which I really do believe, provide another way for people to quote unquote read, then I'm all for it. And I think that there's a huge potential in the Caribbean for audiobooks. Just our culture and our nature in terms of how we express ourselves and the languages and the dialects. It's just, ripe for that kind of production. And so very interested in that.
Yeah, you're a nation of great storytellers.
Yes, we are fortunate in that way.
Just
Yeah, but I think.
yeah, I was going to ask.
Go ahead, Simon.
So sorry, yeah, I was going to ask Latoya, the in our country and in my province, because we have specific curriculum programs throughout Canada, and I know that it's certainly the same thing in the United Kingdom, but in the high school and in the elementary school, I'm assuming there's a reading program or some sort of reading curriculum or suggested readings, and how much of it is Jamaican authors that are being taught in the classrooms? Could you? I mean, you're probably young enough to know because you were probably in high school not long ago, I bet. But yeah, I'm just wondering how much of it is actually Jamaican authors, because often we read all kinds of things. I mean, here for the longest time in Quebec, we were reading a lot of French authors, and now we're driving towards a more international point of view, including Quebec authors. So how's that in Jamaica?
So, starting with myself, my experience, my high school experience, not to mention primary. So, let's start at high school. It was filled with, A Man for All Seasons, Othello, they just went through the whole Shakespeare list and just ticked off, all of them. And in high school, that, in the upper grades, that I was introduced to more Jamaican writers and also African writers at the time. I remember Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe being the book that mentally, without having been to Africa then, subsequently went to South Africa, Namibia, etc. But without having stepped foot, on the continent, I was reading this book that I could relate to so many parts of the culture. Like it was just reading about family members in some respects, like, yeah. And that I think is the power of inclusive literature. I'm not against us having books from other parts of the world. I'm all for it, but it has to be a deliberate blending. And I think that, there has been a lot of work since then to make our curriculum more inclusive. However, I do believe that there's still a lot more work to be done, particularly in works that tend to incorporate fiction, incorporate history, because we've had a lot of misrepresentation and in some cases not addressing significant stories or events at all. And so that's why, the work of newer publishers like Blue Banyan Books is so important, starting with children and reversing across the board where other Caribbean islands are concerned. Some of us are more advanced than others, but it's a work in progress. It's not, I wouldn't say it's where it needs to be, but it's definitely a work in progress. And on the matter of reading, I was a part of a national consultative committee for a broader regional project funded by US Latin American Caribbean reads. And what that program sought to do was to basically look at reading from a data-driven perspective and not just what we think. And that program actually identified quite a few gaps in what we were doing locally in terms of the strategy, in terms of the availability of culturally relevant materials. And so coming out of that project, we had over 30 new titles that are now available to children through our Jamaica Library Service portal and other spaces. And they were actually written by educators in some instances, and a combination of teachers and people who are writers on a full-time basis. So that, I think, is just some of the progress that we're making. But we're definitely not there yet. We're on the way.
Thank you. You're Emma.
When we plan our PWB trade mission to the Caribbean, and we come and visit the Kingston Book Festival, what else should we be visiting?
I like it.
Wow. So first of all, I'm stuck there. So yes, let's tick that off. Kind of, because there are exciting things happening in the region. So in Trinidad, there is the Bocas Lit Festival, which has really grown over the years. They now are modeling a year-round program, which is something that we aspire to. And they're, because of that year-round model, they're able to do a lot more engagement of schools and communities, which is something that we are very interested in. But as you know, that takes a lot of planning and funding. So these are things that are developmental. But they're doing really good work. On the other end as well, they're training writers, having workshops, which is fantastic. In Grenada, I'm excited to share that, they haven't officially launched yet, but they are also, Grenada, if you know, is one of the smaller islands in the Eastern Caribbean. And they are, looking at launching their a writers award later this year, which I think is super exciting, because there are a lot of talented people. And also, interestingly, there is a with the different audio, producing things for audio, looking at create adapting books for film, doing that kind of training in terms of screenwriting. So it's a very exciting time across the region. I would say every country has something to offer, but those are just some of the things I can share off the top of my head.
Some of the highlights tour.
Yes. Yes.
And as you know, PWB is quite an international community. How else can the international publishing community support Caribbean publishing, do you think?
I think so. I'll share the story of my engagement with the IPA. The IPA had this event that they organized and pitched it as, okay, this is something for Latin America, and kind of tucked somewhere in there should have been the Caribbean. But I engaged former President Jose, and I'm like, the Caribbean is its own region, and we have shared history and culture with Latin America. We see them as our neighbors, but we are our own region, and we deserve to be identified as such and to engage with our international colleagues along that way. And I was so shocked because I was very strong, to be honest, in my communication with him, very passionate. And he was so humble and receptive to it. And immediately reached out, connected me with different, Hugo, sorry, who was the president, and Jose, of course, is Secretary General. And they were very receptive just in terms of getting to understand the region more, seeing how they could give us a platform, give us a voice. And that has continued with Budor. And I, I'm happy to report, for example, that, Book Industry Association of Jamaica was one of the first Caribbean regional members, but now we have the Book Industry Association of Trinidad and Tobago who have become members of IPA, and I'm hoping that that momentum will continue. And so that's one way, just listening and finding ways to collaborate. I'm very interested in audience development, some exchanges that promote that, because I believe, again, stories are powerful. What we do in publishing is powerful, not just for the pleasure that we get from reading, but the very important value of just understanding different perspectives, different people and cultures. And I think that if we're more deliberate in those kind of exchanges, when we're thinking about programming events or book fairs or conferences, thinking about how we can incorporate the smaller regions or the parts of the world that are, people are not necessarily always heard from, then I think it makes the discourse a lot richer and connects us more as people. On the business side of things, I also think that I'd love to see international colleagues be more deliberate about partnership for things like solving this distribution pain, right? We could start there, which I think if we're able to solve that challenge, it will solve a lot of other things. So I think, inclusivity and diversity are very almost buzzwords now, but I do believe that there is value to continuing that conversation and looking inward, starting with yourself, and then looking, if you own a company, to say, how have I, what's missing? What have I not done? Or how can I engage, out of the world? There are those kind of deliberate reflections or contemplations that people can make. I'm happy to be, again, I'm not like, the president of the Caribbean or anything, but I am more than willing to share my contacts with colleagues across the region, which I actively do. Most of it behind the scenes whenever I meet new people in the industry, which is why I love things like book fairs and conferences, which I desperately miss in person. So, because when I make contacts, I never really think of it as just somebody who I'm meeting for myself, especially if the person is willing to learn more about our region and wants to do work. I, like to do that people to people connecting. And so that's one of the ways I actively help. So I'm more than willing to, talk to companies and people who are looking to engage the Caribbean, whether through programming, whether through business relationships, new market exploration, technology such as the audiobooks and other innovations. We're ready.
We have a question come in, Latoya, in the comments. If you look at the comments section on your screen about that the viewer has said, we're thinking of Caribbean culture as a whole, but it's still a question of how would you define your specificity, your color and narration as Jamaican publishers, and what is the talent of Jamaican publishers in respect to Dominican production and so forth?
In respect to Dominican production, I'm not sure I get the Dominican published production part of it, but I can answer in terms of I guess the person is asking me to move from the broader Caribbean to maybe being more specific about Jamaica. So, in looking at Jamaica and our current landscape in terms of publishing, I would say that I would love to see more publishing houses that are not, or big publishing houses are those who are in textbooks. When I say big, I
Yeah,
mean
yeah,
both in terms of size and earnings and all of that. What I would actually love to see is that our publishing industry and publishers develop in an ecosystem that can allow Jamaican authors to reap success right here from home, which would mean more investment in looking at things like fiction, which we do really well in terms of our writers, but it's just that we don't have the full ecosystem here at home to necessarily support them right through the entire process, which I'm sure everybody knows about. And some of those challenges, I think I clearly kind of stated those before, what they are and what
yeah,
they look like. So I would say that that is my right now. We have a lot of talented people. So I keep mentioning Blue Banyan, but I'm doing that because I think that Tanya Batson Savage and her team are a good example of somebody, a younger publisher, seeing a gap, seeing an opportunity, in this case, young adult literature that is representational but has a universal message to young people anywhere, but can share the experiences from a Jamaican standpoint, weaving in our history and culture and producing it both in terms of design and editorial quality for a global audience. And that kind of work was made possible through the publisher's own talent, but also through their strategic partnership with the BERT Code Awards program, which was a major investment in developing young adult literature in the region.
yeah. So tell us, Latoya, who should we be reading from the Caribbean? Which authors should we be reading?
Wow. So there
And,
is
I'm
so
asking us, Latoya, I want also an answer to that in regards to children's literature. So
Yeah,
don't give me just adult fiction. Give me some or nonfiction. Give me some kid stuff as well. I'm
wow.
partial to that.
So let me start off by in terms of let's start with adults, right? So there is actually, I can point you to a place online where you can actually find a whole list for yourself. So, Rebel Women Lit, who I mentioned earlier, also had a Caribbean Readers Awards, which was almost a first, I think, in terms of getting from Caribbean readers what they like and what they are reading. So if you look them up, that's Rebel Women Lit, and look for their Caribbean Readers Awards, you will actually see the nominees in each category and the winners. And I think it's a really good reflection because it wasn't some publishing literati that sat in some, separate room and decided that these were the people that you should be reading. It's actually the readers who said,
Perfect.
we believe that these people are representing the best of the Caribbean. In
We can
terms
put that
of,
link. We can put that link on the
yes,
PWC. Yeah, we'll do that after.
yes, please.
Sorry, go on.
Yes. Yes. So in addition to that, as I think I started out talking about the Commonwealth Writers Prize. So one of the judges this year, Diana Macaulay, is actually an exceptional Caribbean writer who is touching on things, important topics like the environment. In her everyday job, she is an environmentalist, a world-renowned one. but she does such a beautiful job of, weaving in those themes with her work. And so, I think that for anyone who is looking to get that kind of voice from the region, she is definitely somebody to be looking at. Her latest book is called Daylight Come. She also wrote another one called Gone to Drift. And all of them tend to have environmental themes, but they look at family, friendships, relationships, etc. Our national poet laureate, Olive, in terms of looking at, she is Jamaican Canadian, by the way. So she actually is based in Canada sometimes, but lives here. So Olive Senior actually has Pandemic Poems. That's her latest book. And actually, she has been publishing these poems on Twitter and other places. And some of them are quite funny. Some of them make you think. So if you look her up, you can actually find some of the poems online, but she has put them into a book, which I think would be really nice. I'll get to children's in a bit. Roland Watson Grant, who is the Commonwealth, as I said, the regional winner for the Commonwealth Prize, Writers Prize this year. His work is also exceptional. I have a clear bias because I really just love his work, and I think I'm almost an ambassador for his work, but it's just so good. He has a trilogy. The third isn't out yet, but the ones that have been published, you have Skid and Sketcher. And I think those are just two really fine books that talk about, from a young adult's perspective, just life, family, finding beauty in brokenness. And there's really a lot of magic in that. Outside of his books, he's also a contributor to, Pre-Lit magazine, which is, I would highly recommend that people check out that literary magazine coming out of the Caribbean, P-R-E-E, Lit. Its editor is Annie Paul, and it's a good place to go for Caribbean writing, as in the latest, and just discovering new writers as well. Then in terms of, we have the usual suspects like Kai Miller, who has just put out his latest book, and it's been creating such like, people are really responding to it very well. And so, of course, he's somebody who is well known, well established. Nicole Dennis Ben lives and works out of New York, but maintains very close connections with the island. And the list can go on and on and on. In terms
lots
of
great summer reads.
Exactly. And and we'd love to see a lot of these writers, appearing on festivals and programs that are not the usual suspects in, North America, etc. Even though we welcome that, but other parts of the world, I think there's a great opportunity for audience development as well. And as I say, if you're looking for new voices, looking at publications like Pre-Lit, etc., could give you, outside of the established authors, you can find some new voices there. For Caribbean literature, Blue Banyan from Jamaica stands out in that they're based in Jamaica, but she's publishing right across the Caribbean. So she's working with authors who are in Trinidad, who are in Guyana, who are in the Eastern Caribbean. So that imprint is actually very good in terms of showing a range of works. Kelly Magnus, who I mentioned earlier, she took a little break of the publishing scene, but she's actually, I think, launching a book later this year. And her area of specialty is really strong representation. So she did, I think, Jamaica's first board book for children that showed, characters that have hair like mine. So I'm wearing locks. I'm not Rastafari, but I do up to wear locks. And just having a father and son, for example, illustrated, um, looking like a lot of people look on the island was very important, groundbreaking, really. Her series is called Little Lion. And so she will be, I think, launching a new book at the end of this year. And of course, you have illustrators who have worked on several projects, like Rachel Moss, she's almost like, if you look at most children's books in Jamaica, she is the illustrator. And it's not because there aren't other illustrators, but she has mastered the art of capturing the look, feel, emotions, representation in terms of a mix of characters so well, so effortlessly, that she has been called on to do quite a few projects. There are, like members of our association, like a Natalie Rochester from Mango Tales. If you know the Caribbean, you know that one of our obsessions is mangoes, like really nice mangoes. And so I really like the name of her company. But
My favorite
Natalie,
fruit.
well, we have that in common. So when you come, I'll have mangoes ready for you. Um, but Natalie, Natalie actually did this book, Hazel Hummingbird. The hummingbird is our national bird. It's actually right behind me. Like, well, not a real one, but right. And so she did this book, Hazel Hummingbird, which was just teaching children about our indigenous plants and bird. But the book is actually bilingual. So the story is in the one book, but it's actually in Spanish and English. And we actually, yes, and she actually converted that book to Braille and made a presentation to one of our local homes for blind students. And that was another emotional thing because we had children who are Jamaicans living in Jamaica and learning who had never, quote unquote, seen our national bird. And because she converted this book to Braille, I cried at the presentation, of course, when they were able to feel and see our national bird, and they are
Wow.
Jamaican children. Like, I want to do more of those projects.
Yeah.
So that's what, when we say inclusion, that's what we mean. We actually want it to be real and come to life, not just a word that we use. And
Yeah.
so yeah, there's just so much happening. I think one of the gaps though in the region is that we really don't have the Kingston Book Festival programs. Oh, I also must mention one of our members who is the first children's bookstore exclusively for children in Jamaica, Cozy Corner Books. Yes, they are phenomenal ladies who started this. And so they have continuous programming for children. So children can go in and they do illustration, they do storytelling, they do, all kinds of fun activities. And I think they're just amazing. But as I was going on to say, while Kingston Book Festival has programming for children, we actually don't have, I think regionally, we don't have like a dedicated children's publishing, our children's literature like festival,
Right.
which I think is a gap. It's a
Yeah.
gap. And I think that, some partnerships could help to make that come alive, because we do have some exceptional writers, but I do think that there's a lot of potential for growth. We are not anywhere near having the amount of children's book that we would like to have in the region, and developing the skills like illustration and so on. That's something that I would like to see.
Totally agree. I'm thinking, and we often go back to this pandemic as having had the unfortunate side back of keeping us apart, but it also taught us that we could connect this way digitally. And
Yes.
and your suggestion of some sort of children's book festival, I mean, could open the door for authors and illustrators that might be able to connect with the children in Jamaica, and
Yes.
even though they're in Europe or in Canada, they can still connect. And I think children would love to see their favorite author. You know,
Yes.
I don't know how much of a Robert Munch fan you are, but I know he's everywhere in Canada. So
He's everywhere.
Like, wow, Robert Munch is talking to us live. You know.
Yes. Yes, and the thing is,
thing about this. Yeah.
Our children lead. I think our children do inclusion and diversity naturally. I think it's the adults that are catching up, to be honest. Because my children introduce me to new authors all the time, telling me what they want to read and who they would love to see. So they're my own little programming advisory committee, you know. So yeah, that's definitely. Actually, I have some news on that point. We are actually, for the first time, Kingston Book Festival is our official digital programming partner of the Bath Children's Festival.
Wow.
Their reading is magic. So we will actually have a Jamaican author and illustrator. So Richard Natu, who is an artist, and Olivia Wilmot, who is an educator who edited this book. They are actually going to be appearing at the Bath Children's Literature Festival, so in September. So yeah, we have started.
There you go.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
We're coming to the end, I believe, Emma, already?
Yeah.
Yeah. An hour. We could have gone on for another hour for sure.
Yeah.
I want to thank you. I mean, it's been so dynamic, so interesting. And I want to go back to that analogy you used. You talked about your triathlon and listening to you and what's happening in the Caribbean and in Jamaica. I mean, yes, you are running a triathlon. It isn't easy. There are still hurdles ahead, but you are clearly on the path to victory because you're doing all the right things. And we need to be there behind you, not only just to cheer, but also to give you some.
Thank you.
You make sure you reach out to all of us at PWB and you use and abuse IPA. That's what we feel, right? That's why we feel. So let's make sure that Jose knows that, you know.
Yeah, it's been both fascinating and enjoyable, Latoya. It's been really lovely talking to you and finding out about you and your passions and what drives you, as well as finding out much more about what's going on in the Caribbean and what we should be reading and it's definitely enticed us to come and visit you even more than we wanted to before. So thank you.
Yes, I definitely hope that we'll be able to meet up in person soon. But, you know, as Simon said, these platforms, I even believe that when we are able to meet up in person, what we have discovered in being able to connect virtually is of so much value that we can incorporate it all. I'm very grateful to PWB. I love the group. Hello to everyone who is tuning in. I think it's just a fantastic initiative. And, you know, congratulations to all the founders and the administrators. It's such a very necessary platform and network. And I'm happy that you invited me to share with your group. I encourage you all to read Caribbean. If you've never tried a book before from the region, just use any other resources I've shared and grab one and start reading. And I look forward to many more conversations with all of you in different spaces. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Latoya.
All right.
Stay well.